everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Mary Sheehan, and my colleague Jay Imus is here today. We're from Virto Analytics. We're a consumer behavioral measurement company. I'm from San Francisco. Jay is from New York. And we also have offices in London, and our headquarters is in Helsinki, Finland. I just was out there last week if you want to hear anything about Finnish culture, what it's like to go to Scandinavia in January. But today we're really here to talk about a common theme that we've been hearing about at the conference so far, which is really how to evolve with the changes in the consumer landscape and how to be able to complement that with what we can do with measurement and sampling. So just a little bit about Virto Analytics. What we're really all about is getting this holistic view of the consumer. We do this through single source panels, and those are passively metered, and Jay will talk a lot more about that today. Come on in. Just getting started. And what we really think that we've been able to do is democratize this type of cross-platform research. So give this data and insights not just to the biggest companies and brands, but also make it more accessible for anyone that needs to do market research as well. So here's a quick sneak peek of some of our customers. So we work with some of the biggest brands in the world. We work with market researchers like yourself at these companies, and we also have quite a bit of partnerships with research companies as well. Hi, come on in. Great, so to kind of kick us off today and get in the right frame of mind, as we've talked about this morning through a lot of the different panels, consumer behavior has really changed dramatically. So it's changed more than 5 years than in the past 50. So let's let this sink in for a second. In 1968, 50 years ago, the hottest consumer trends that were happening and changing behavior were color TV and the electric typewriter. Now we have all kinds of things that are really disrupting the way that we behave with technology. So we can watch and stream TV shows and movies from any device really anywhere in the world. We've thrown away our CD collection because Spotify and Pandora are so ubiquitous on all of our devices. We can plug it all in with our personal device and assistant apps that are at the home. So these things have fundamentally changed the way that we've been able to interact with technology in the world, and it's really accelerating at a rate that's unprecedented. And one thing that we see with the changes in the consumer landscape, and one thing that kind of ties it all together, is that the consumer landscape, the consumers are really always connected. In a recent report that we released, we actually found that on average, people were using about 25 hours a month just on these different social devices. So they're always connected with technology, and they're connected with each other. And consumers also are moving really fluidly across apps and devices and different platforms. So if you're anything like me, you're really comfortable with watching Netflix and also checking out the news on your mobile phone, or using your tablet while watching TV as well. You're using constantly different devices, and let alone the different apps. So this morning I've already been on Twitter, the SampleCon app, the New York Times podcast, getting directions here through Google Maps, just using all different types of applications and flipping really fluidly between those. That's something that's totally common nature for us now. And in fact, the average US consumer is actually they actually own 5 devices, and they're using, 40% of them are using smartphones, tablets, and PCs during any given month. So this is something that we're really seeing in terms of the trends. And more than that, consumers are actually using a lot of different apps and applications. So while people might have about 75 different apps downloaded on their phone or different devices, they're using about a third of these at any given point in time. So this is really to say that although we have access to all kinds of information and apps and different technology, people are still making choices about what they want to use and when. And it's up to us as researchers to understand what, when, and why, and how they're using these different types of technology and what really makes that important. And welcome to the guys that just joined us. We're from Virto Analytics, so just kind of setting up how the consumers have changed in today's landscape. So now I'd like to give you a quick overview of the measurement landscape. So we've talked about how consumer behavior has changed so dramatically. And in a way, consumer measurement has not really caught up to that. So in the 1950s, we had the famous TV diary trackers from Nielsen. So a lot of you in the room might be surprised to know that they actually still use the paper diaries in certain DMAs. My family was actually a Nielsen family in the 1990s, and I think that's kind of what piqued my interest in being part of the media measurement space. Then with TVs, there were set-top boxes that gave us a little bit more information on programming. With mobile and digital coming to life, there were, of course, new metrics like cost per click, conversion metrics. With video platforms like YouTube, new metrics like viewability and engagement became more important. And with all those moves to digital, there have actually been a real undertaking from different organizations like the Interactive Advertising Bureau, the IAB, to make sure that there's a consistency and standardization in these types of measurement. So I have that up there in 2012. And today what we're really seeing is that there are a lot of ways to measure these consumers, to measure and survey these consumers. But often we see that they're really siloed and they're not tracking the whole holistic picture. They're individually device-centric, so they're tracking on what's happening on these mobile phones, what's happening on your computers, and we're not seeing the holistic picture. That's where we are today. And this really pains the industry in a lot of ways. So here's a quote from Curtis Tingle, who's the CMO of Elasys. So most marketers are still struggling to create a unified view of the consumer and apply it to their entire media strategy. They don't understand this unified view. And moreover, here's one from Samsung. A lot of times we're looking for an answer like ROI, but that doesn't tell the whole story of how effective things really are. So this is really something that's paining the industry in all different sectors. And thinking about this old way of measurement, just to really hammer home on some of the ways that it's actually creating blind spots. So there's a lot of audience duplication issues. There's a lot of overlap that are really hard to mitigate. There's survey fatigue, as you all are aware. The surveys are very long, they're very tedious, and frankly people, you're trying to sample the same group over and over again, and it's really hard to get those respondents. And then there's a disconnect between the recall and the reality of what's happening. So when we're doing any kind of recall projects, trying to make sure that people really understand what their past behavior was and how that is affecting what they're doing now, it's often hard for people to remember that on their own. There's that really big disconnect. For the digital world, there's also this reliance for these third parties to actually tag your content to make sure that it's tracking properly. That makes the overhead and the time and resources a little bit more hard to actually implement. And what this all kind of boils down to are two things. One is that it's really that we're measuring devices and not people. And secondly, that it's creating a bit of a black box environment. So you're really not transparent on what's happening overall. So the problem, to kind of sum it up, is that we're really measuring we really need to measure real people and their behavior, and we're not really doing that today. All right, so now I'll hand it over to my colleague Jay in just a second for him to talk about the new way of measurement and how that's going to connect the dots. Just to kind of sum up what we've talked about here, the research gaps that we're actually seeing because of this disconnect is that data is not reliable and we're not able to get this verifiable information. The attitudes are not really revealed. We can't really connect the dots between why someone did something and the what of it as well. And to really do a true project that has both behavioral and attitudinal attributes, it's incredibly time and resource intensive, and it takes a while to get this off the ground. All right, great. So now to kick it off for Jay, he'll talk about the new era of modern measurement. Here you go, Jay.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
1950s to 2018, just like that. Well, thank you. Thanks a lot for laying that out, Mary. So what we're trying to portray, and some things that we've noticed, again, lightning speed in terms of like consumer adoption, but we're trying to create a holistic picture of a consumer by tying together behavioral data and survey, and how that can save them time and really much more meaningful insights. The 4 steps to the modern measurement that we've seen and trying to articulate are single source platform, single source measurement, really kind of identifying across many different devices, but really from a single source. Leveraging passive metering, okay, as much as possible. So really leverage the detailed second-by-second transactions that happen like in the digital world, and not having to rely on recall from those type of digital footprints. really being able to gather deep demographics of users, everything from attitudinal, what really like the key elements, certainly things that could be allowing you to cut data and make much more meaningful insights towards target audiences that brands are desperately need. And then fourth piece is really integrating the survey into the research itself and tying it all together. So from a single source measurement perspective, there are many platforms, right? I mean, you have an iOS user versus an Android user. Different types of content, people behave differently. Understanding the consumption on a tablet versus a smartphone, tying together behaviors on a desktop. Again, to having the view and the time of day metrics, really key for understanding how someone starts their day, what they do during the lunch period, and how they finish, and tracking that along the same way. Also being able to track an entire segment. So if I want to hone in on females 18 to 24 that are of a particular ethnicity, just being able to aggregate that, looking at a segment, and being able to again have a single source across that whole group. From a passive metering perspective, what we is like literally an application that would sit on a smartphone, that would sit on a tablet, and really look at the individual clickstream data, look at the search terms, having the application usage, knowing that Pandora was opened and then it moved into the background, YouTube was on the foreground, and really kind of looking through all of that. To be able to recall and ask how much time I spent on watching previews for the Olympics wouldn't really be an effective use of survey itself, and that's where that discourse and dislink comes in between the recall and the passive component. So being able to leverage that be absolutely tremendous help to be able to do that. The other component is too like the context, right? So if I am utilizing a search in my house, that could be a lot different than looking while I'm out of home, right? And if I am in a retail environment, I am at a hotel, so putting everything in context with, have latitude, longitude, like when that happens will totally change what you're trying to measure. So again, coupling that together would be very beneficial. So the demography, very important. So again, we talked this morning. It was brought up about why mobile platforms are difficult from survey, and it gets to it's like, I want to have a 20-25 minute or longer survey. If you have the demographics up front, you no longer need to ask that information. It can be appended directly to the behavioral data. That is key to have, of course, but if you're not having to design that into a survey, you're already a leg up and you can save a lot of time. And the fourth component is being able to survey those that you're collecting the passive information about, right? Having that integration allows you to directly stitch together and append the survey itself through all of the behavioral data that you've just tracked. So those are really like the four key attributes, and that's really like the why behind it, right? So if I started using Orbitz and then I booked a flight on Expedia, like why was that? Why did I stop using that application? I've seen it, I no longer use it, but what led me to do that? Or I was in market for a new laptop during the holiday period. I intended on purchasing a Chromebook. I left with a MacBook. What was the influence around that? Like, what you bought, but why did you do it? And that's kind of like leveraging the smart integrated survey research. So what we're putting together and why it's so important is that you're making business decisions and how to adapt quicker, really, and making intelligent business plans around it. And it's really the whole strategy. Because that consumer model is changing so quickly, taking this together is really allowing you to adapt quicker. And it just changes the way from, like, again, someone that may have casually interacted, and I'll use like a Pinterest example. You may have a users, and I want to get sample from Pinterest. They may have, used that site once a month. It could be a lot different than someone who's behaviorally interacting with Pinterest, 4 or 5 times a week. That is much more valuable because it's not a convenience. They've absolutely shown their interaction with that brand, and now you have the ability to interact with them, on an interview basis, and knowing that that's a real person, true interest, high level of engagement, extremely important. So the smart poll approach really combines giving the whole holistic aspect of the measurement as well as the survey itself, but essentially the 3 different use cases, right? Creating preferred attitudinal information, being able to look at a whole comprehensive consumer as the one individual, and then really trying to, probably the most important is like understanding like different journey mappings, right? So like, when did I purchase something, why, at what point of the funnel was I in, and then just trying to layer the 2 things together. So how it works, you're defining either a target audience who's visited a particular digital property, right? So it could be, I'm in market for a car, so I want to look at everyone that went to Car Gurus, KBB, Cars.com, and that was my target audience. So we can already verify anyone that was visited these sites in the last 6 months. So I want to do a study around automobile shopping. That's the target audience, so that's my interview base. Or you could lay it out, just like I want to look at particular demographic segments, so that could be, again, females 35 to 44, or mothers with children, and that could be your segment as well. Then you would layer in a survey, right? The survey design around what I'm trying to gather against, right? So that would be, again, typically 15 minutes where we've seen like our sweet spot, PC, mobile, tablet friendly, having the individual survey level respondents and penning that back to the actual behavioral data. And that's where we put the insights to work. So those outputs are then, hey, which sites index the highest among this target audience, or what are the top social networking sites that my audience has engaged with? What are the competitive brands that my consumers are, or that my core brand is interacting with? How can I adopt some of those strategies? I will go through a couple of use cases and kind of see how this all comes together. In this one, we were tasked to look at mothers with babies of a certain age, and really first step was identifying, tell me their social interaction, right? So, the traditional high reach properties like Facebook and YouTube, they're certainly there, but what's interesting to point out here is that like Google Plus and Pinterest is where like there's significant over-indexing, almost like about 50% more likely to interact with those brands for mothers with babies. So if that's the social networking campaign in that aspect, it'd be wise to generate interaction directly with those brands. So then, using the same target, just try to understand the online shopping behaviors. This was a study done in the UK. So you'll see brands such as Sainsbury, Marks and Spencer, Tesco, really are like high reach, again, one-stop shopping, home goods, home apparel. So that's the whole digital behavior. So like, right, we need like the top 15 digital behaviors of this particular segment. Another use case is just really looking at kind of device interaction. So this was a study done with the BBC and looking at video consumption across device. So again, are individuals switching a lot? You know, those can be classified as like the screen hoppers. Looking at the top quintile of those that watch 9+ hours of content each week. That's a very different segment versus kind of like the average online user. So kind of understanding the subtlety of where the users are spending their time could really help develop, what that kind of brand or customer acquisition strategy, could be. This one really talks about looking at the path to purchase. Cosmetics is a pretty interesting space because, you can go to a beauty.com, you can purchase, offline via retail, lots of different places to kind of purchase, your kind of brand preferences. So it's kind of neat to evaluate and determine where someone actually made a purchase, right? So like you could conduct like trigger surveys, and that would be done at like different touch points of a consumer's journey. So do they have a shopping cart open? And that would depict in the kind of the magenta, like when the shopping cart was the teal open, right? So like, and then looking at the conversion, so you'll see if these particular day parts, that's when a lot more activity was happening. So you can kind of look at like kind of cool time of day conversion ratios. And this instance is really looking more about a customer journey. So if I'm planning to do a European cruise or travel abroad in the next 6 months, it's pretty significant. There's going to be a lot of research involved on that. Did I do some research on TripAdvisor? Did I later book with Expedia? At what point did Hotels.com come into the mix? Just kind of really understanding like the different trends, different aspects of it. Why would I start using one app and utilize another? And I can also say anecdotally, when I was on the plane reading like the United Hemispheres magazine yesterday on my way here, the CEO from Untuckit was featured, and it's pretty interesting because he started that company about like 10 years ago, and the whole intention was to like, all right, we're going to market to hipsters, and that's going to be the millennial audience, and they're going to love these shirts, right? And so what they found out was looking at all the responses that, like, the whole shirt was designed, nice taper, slim, that as soon as they appended the data of those that were buying online with Facebook, they could look at the profile of the users, and they found it's like, wow, this segment's actually, males 45 to 54, and I'm like, the shirts aren't designed the right way, and we're not marketing to the right folks. So then they looked at, okay, well, where can I find this audience? And they started looking at what are their news habits, right? So they looked at, you saw that like online they were looking at CNN, MSNBC, Fox, right? This was a lot of, and that's how they shifted the consumer spend and the marketing dollars towards like those news channels. And then they also layered in, survey response, certainly towards those users. I just thought the timing was pretty neat, but that was a really practical way, not one of our clients or anything, but it was just a really neat way of knowing that consumer target was much different. And so once they started analyzing the digital behavior of that group, they were able to shift really quickly with that changing need and have a better marketing and product plan. So that's it for this morning, and we've got a time for some questions and whatnot, and certainly love to answer any of those or hear what you think. And sure.
This isn't unique to your panel, but I imagine that because you're limited to what people in the panel are doing on their devices, that keeping a large and healthy user base is especially paramount to the success of the product.
Sure.
How large is your panel, and how are you working to recruit and keep and retain panelists?
Great question. Yeah, and it's not unique to us or anyone in the space. So we have a registration of over 1 million. We possibly track about 50,000 that we can verify that they have our meter installed on all their devices. But inevitably, you're going to have a churn, right? And to keep those panelists happy, one is like, how do I not over survey them, or how do we kind of manage that? How do we incentivize them, properly? And we found the incentivization piece is not as critical. It's a little bit more about making them empowered. And it's a double opt-in panel, so they're very receptive. We get a completion rate of about 30%, which is pretty high. And they participate quite often. So, but we try to not overtax those panelists and overserve them, and so to kind of keep them happy.
I'd also say we're constantly testing different things as well. So when I was in Finland last week, I was working with the panel team on some of the ways that we're incentivizing and recruiting new panelists. So it's kind of an ongoing process, right? It's new devices are coming out all the time, new operating systems. Every change that we have with that means a new change for our panelists as well. So we're trying out different ways to keep them as happy. But it's definitely needing to evolve with changing technology as well. You can't just have a great panel and then call it a day. It's something that you have to work at all the time. And I think that's one thing that is really our bread and butter, is that we've put a lot of resources into that.
So the remaining 950,000 that aren't signed up for this passive metering, does that just operate as a traditional research panel, or what are you doing with those other?
Yeah, great stuff. So, they are approachable. Yeah, it's more traditional research that we're able to. And as you can imagine, their devices that get lost, broken, you may stop metering, come in. So people will kind of come in and come out. Yes.
A couple of questions. The 50,000, is that all U.S. or is that spread?
Oh, that's
geographies?
Yeah, it's the U.S. We have a panel over in India and the U.K. About 1/10 that size.
Okay, so you have 50,000. And the behavioral data that you collect, is that all through the passive metering, or are you collecting behavioral data by any other means, like cookies or beacons and
Yeah, it's all behavioral measurement. Yeah, so we're not doing it all through the passive meter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll do some third-party appends, but that's strictly just in terms of we have a syndicated service like ComScore, Nielsen, that we also do audience projections against. But all the meters passive. I mean, all the data is passive meter.
And one question.
The biggest geographical constraint, it's the economies and the cost associated to run something that robust, is primarily why we're concentrating all the efforts here in the U.S. and UK. We will license out the metering, the whole technology, to work with companies like Google and those that want to have private panels that they'll build through us, to leverage that technology.
I'm sorry, remember the last question. The behavioral data that you supply, is it kind of summarized and segmented, or is it just troves of behavioral data?
Yeah, great question. So it can be in a as granular as a process data feed, where it's individual respondent level information, or it can be aggregated through an easily manageable data cube, or it could be summarized in by segment. It could be as simple as I just need the top 50 apps and websites of this segment, and it can be in a PowerPoint delivery from that perspective. So
yeah, we're finding that a lot of even within the same company, there are a lot of different types of researchers. Some people want they want the raw data, and they want to be able to do whatever they want to do with it. Sometimes they want it actually piped into BI tools like Tableau. But then some people just want, they're hiring us for the time and resource savings, so they want those upper level insights shared to PowerPoint. So we work really closely with our customers to understand what the deliverables are, but we do offer an array depending on what their needs are.
Are you guys
Yes.
getting location data, and are you running specific geolocation campaigns targeting?
Yeah, so we don't run campaigns or targeting, so we're not doing anything with the data from that perspective. We do collect the lat long from search, website, and app usage when it's enabled, and that is most of those use cases are kind of like, all right, in home versus out of home, because we might not, because it's not as consistent.
Pricing work for something like this? If I'm a buyer, I say I want 500 people's data over the course of a week, and you develop a price from that, or is there an end size? How are you estimating projects?
Yeah, so it takes into account exactly that, like how many, what is the panelist count, like of the data? What's the breadth of the data? Is it 30 days or is it a year? And then, if you're integrating the survey design, like, what does the survey itself look like? But for the most part, I mean, I would say it could be as simple as like 25,000 for like a complete package to, maybe 60, like in that range, and then certainly. So yeah, it might give you a feel for what that would be.
Have you guys done much work to try to understand what some of the SKUs may be, behavioral SKUs and otherwise, for those willing to be metered and general population?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, so our panel will skew more female and Android on the platform. It's much harder to recruit. iOS panelists. It's also, again, it's always tricky to get the higher household income. But it's not we're constantly manipulating, looking at those difficult to reach segments and trying to be as close to U.S. Census level as we can. But most definitely, yeah, that's always a trick.
And you have that demographic information, right? So if I can see that it was a 35-year-old male in the Midwest, and that's that data?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you have the results and you would append that back, you'll know exactly who it is. So it may get more tricky where you want to have, I need 500 and I need 100 in each different segment. If we're surveying for that, it may be more tricky to reach harder to reach segments. But all of the data is back to each. You'll have the panelist ID. You'll know which whether it was a laptop, smartphone, or tablet where the data came from. You would have all that, and that's why none of that has to get put into the survey design, because all of the data is back appended to the individual user. So, yeah, and the whole process, you scope it out, you look at the feasibility, and then you just if it's a narrow segment, then we'll let you know. If it's with high incidence rates, great fit. But we've done some pretty tricky ones that have been. And that's the other thing too. Like, I think traditionally it's been like, with the clients will be like, how come this isn't 1,000 users here? We're like, well, because we don't need 1,000. We have 100, and we know 3 months of the behavioral data behind it. That's the whole educational level that has to be, it's a change, and that's because it's much more granular as opposed to just a mass. A number of responses. This is fewer responses, but much tighter data.
Is your relationship with the passive panel all digital, or do you guys have do you mail them things and do stuff like that, or is it all digital?
Yeah. So this footprint, or the premise was that we started in digital first. We are close to looking at linear and OTT space, right? So kind of understanding like the TV consumption. We sometimes leverage third parties to look at offline purchase data, but it's primarily digital focus. Great, so we're around. Love to chat with you individually. Have our cards out there. If there's any pain points and things that we could help solve for, love to chat and discuss any opportunities or help you if you can. We can give you some ideas of stuff that's worked for us. Happy to share those best practices.
Thank you.